It's NG1 exam day and you have downloaded your paper, you've read your paper, you've decided what question you're going to answer first. How do you answer it? How do you structure the answer? How much information should you write? Well, let's take a look at our paper. It's well worth noting the instructions that NEBOSH give you in the paper. They say, in general, 1 mark is given for each correct technical point that is clearly demonstrated. Avoid writing too little, as this will make it difficult for the examiner to award marks. Single word answers or lists are unlikely to gain marks, as this would not normally be enough to show understanding or a connection with the scenario. So you're going to have to write more than just 1 word answers or little short lists. That's not going to be enough. You need to demonstrate your understanding, show understanding, that's what it says. And while you're at it, a connection with the scenario. And it also says here, your responses to most of these tasks should wholly or partly draw on relevant information from the scenario. Okay, so we've got to link our answers to the scenario. That's the first thing. Let's look at one of the questions. I want to start with this permit to work question here. This seems like quite an easy one. It says the organisation has an effective permit to work PTW system. Why should a PTW be used to help manage this storage tank modification? 10 marks. Now, 10 marks, it means that you have to say 10 things. Let's go back to what the instructions said. They said, in general, 1 mark is given for each correct technical point that is clearly demonstrated. So we have to say at least 10 correct things which demonstrate understanding. Things that are mark-worthy. So there are 10 reasons why. It says, why should the PTW be used? We have to say 10 reasons why, essentially. So now the first place I like to look is within the course materials, just to refresh my memory. So whatever course materials you've got, obviously this is a Compassa course, so I quite like to use our course materials. Here they are. And we've got a whole video here. I don't recommend watching the video. I go straight to what the course materials say. And it talks here about the meaning of a permit to work. And it says things like, a permit to work is used for activities that have a high risk potential. Very good. There's also a whole section on here on when are permit to work systems required. Well, they're used for non-production work, maintenance work, repair work, and so on. They're used for non-routine operations. They're used for jobs where 2 or more people or 2 or more groups have to coordinate their activities between each other so they don't hurt each other. And also they're used for jobs where there is a transfer of work and responsibilities from one group to another. So high risk stuff, non-routine stuff, non-production work, where there's coordination or handover responsibilities. That's a really good starting point for our answer. Now we need to put that into the context of the scenario. So let's take a look at the scenario. The scenario, well, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to focus on the bit which is truly relevant. It talks here about this modification, which is it's about a blockage in a tank, and the repair would normally take a complete process shutdown to clear. So this is very clear that this is not a routine task. This is not a routine modification or anything like that. It's not routine production work. It's non-routine. Now, before I go writing the answer to my question, I like to write down a shopping list of things I'm going to talk about. So here's one thing I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how the work is non-routine modification of tank. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm even going to bullet point that. There we go. I'm going to put it on a bullet point of some kind, and then I'm going to write another bullet point. The scenario talked about, if I saw that correctly, it talked about a highly toxic product. Okay, and we've read this carefully. It talks about the highly toxic chemical, the release of which would be catastrophic for workers as well as people in adjacent businesses, residential houses and schools. Oh my goodness, this sounds awful. So that's another thing to go on my shopping list. This is a high risk task. It is highly toxic. And I'm even going to talk about the high risk to workers and others. Notice I'm not giving big full answers at this point. I'm just writing a list of things to talk about. Let's see if we can just find one more thing here. We've got some contractors, I believe. We've got some contractors, contract workers, We've got they accept the permit to work with necessary precautions, protective equipment. Basically, why are we using the permit to work? We're using it to ensure that the necessary precautions are in place before the work goes ahead. So, all right, so let's write that down. So it identifies the necessary precautions and ensures these are in place. Okay, so I've got 4 short answers. That's not enough. I need at least 10, but for the sake of this video, let's just start with 4. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to flesh out these answers with some detail to demonstrate my full understanding. And I'm going to reference the scenario as much as I possibly can. So we'll say here, this is a non-routine modification of the tank. I'm not going to delete that. I'm just going to put a colon on there. And I'm going to say, this is not production work. It is unusual. It is an unusual situation. And requires people to say, well, what can we say? We're trying to make up some words on the fly if they're showing us saying. So why is non-routine important? Well, let's just take a look. Why is non-routine important? So it's for maintenance, repair, inspection, testing, and so on. Okay, so it's not for all right. So it's about, okay, they're not normally required for routine work, routine maintenance tasks, because we don't want to, right, minimize the seriousness of it. Okay, so it's a usual situation, and use of a PTW would emphasize the importance of identifying hazards and implementing controls before we start. Okay, that's enough. That should get me 1 mark. Now just look at how much I've written there. I've written like 2 lines, 3 lines, 2.5 lines. As a general rule, and this is flexible, but as a general rule, I think that you need to write, for most questions, 20 to 30 words for each mark. There are exceptions to that, but as a general rule, to fully demonstrate your understanding, 20 to 30 words are needed. Do I count them as an examiner? No. Should you go counting them? No. A couple of lines is usually just what's needed. Let's do 1 more before we end the video. So it's a high-risk task, it's a highly toxic chemical, colon. Permit to work systems are reserved for high-risk tasks because using them for lower-risk tasks would undermine the importance of the system. And we can follow on with this next point. As above, this task is high risk, and a catastrophic release of the substance would be harmful. Or a release of the substance would be catastrophic. A release of the substance would be catastrophic. There we are. The PTW ensures this is prevented. Okay, there we are. So I've got like 2 lines. That should be enough. Now that is valid for most questions. In another video, I'll talk about some of the exceptions of when maybe a list is more appropriate. But for most of your answers, 2 short lines per mark should be enough. Reference the scenario at every opportunity that you have.